The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode 142.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Deep Space Nine 4th season premiere called The Way of the Warrior. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Stika. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. Folks, if you can, we'd really appreciate it if you would share The Secrets of Star Trek with your friends. Help us grow this community of Trekkies as we explore Star Trek in all of its facets and over its many decades. We really do appreciate that. So as I mentioned, we are discussing the 4th season premiere. We're jumping back and forth between first season episodes and now the 4th season episodes so we can have some of the good stories to go along with some of the not as good stories. Let's just put it that way. Just be clear that first season was rough. We the last Deep Space Nine story we did was Move Along Home, and that kind of leaves a bad
not
taste.
as bad as The Storyteller.
No.
Which is coming.
And that's coming up
anyway.
soon. Yeah.
So
now I do have
yes.
to mention, okay, so this is the first episode where Cisco shaves his head. So you've
Yes.
got, TNG is when Riker grows the beard, it gets good. Is it when Cisco shaves his head is when DS9 gets good?
Well, and grows the beard. So
And
he gets the
grows
beard.
goat. Yeah.
Yes.
So there, behind the scenes, there is a story about this because Avery Brooks has a preferred look, which is shaved head and with a goatee. And he was required to do the reverse, to shave his chin and not his head to play Cisco. And he didn't feel comfortable with this because it's just not his preferred look. And so he was uncomfortable for the first 3 years of Deep Space Nine with how he looked. Terry Farrell, the actress who plays Jadzia, compared him to the way he looked, because he's very boyish in those first 3 seasons. And she said he looks like a black Ken doll.
Right.
Which is a pretty accurate description.
Yeah.
But he really was uncomfortable. And finally, now that Ira Steven Behr was the showrunner, he went to the higher ups and said, look, can we let this guy have his preferred look? And they said, yeah, okay. And so they were able to accommodate that, and Cisco feels much more confident, I think.
Yes.
After this shift is made. It's like he's in his groove now. He's comfortable with how he appears, and I think that affects his acting. Also, the studio mandated, though, that we want your ratings up and we want you to take on a character from TNG now that their show is done. And we want you to take on Worf. And initially, this was very disruptive because they had planned to start the Dominion War now. And that, in fact, the end of the previous episode of the season 3 finale, the adversary, a changeling tries to destroy Deep Space Nine and so forth, and his dying words to Odo are, "You're too late, we're everywhere." And so that's the drop-off point for season 3. You would expect them to follow up on that in a big way in season 4. It's going to be finding out, okay, so where all are the changelings and what are they doing? And so they plan to start the Dominion War this season, but they said, wait, if we're reconfiguring the show by having Worf become a regular, we need to really embrace this. And so Ira Steven Behr decided, okay, we're gonna embrace this. Worf is actually probably the best character we could take from TNG. If we've got to take one of the characters, Worf is probably the one we can do the most with, especially because he's the most rough-edged of all of the TNG characters. And that's what makes DS9 different than Next Gen, is everybody is rough-edged. And so it's like, we're going to embrace this, we're going to get on board with this, we're going to make it our own, and we're going to turn it to our advantage. And so what that meant is they decided to spend a whole year dealing with the Klingons and integrating them into the show before they pulled the trigger on the Dominion War. And so this is the setup for that. But they still do, it's kind of interesting, pay off the final line of the Changeling from the previous season, "You're too late, we're everywhere," by starting this episode with a Changeling hunt.
Right.
Because that's the very first thing we see is Cisco and Kira with phaser rifles chasing a Changeling. And we don't realize this is a security drill. It's Odo. But it's nicely done, and Odo eventually gets caught, but only after having successfully disguised himself as the reflective surface of a panel on a kiosk.
Yep.
Right.
Which is a really creative thing for him to be, is just this reflective surface. And it's nicely done. And then that serves as a prelude to the bigger Changeling hunt, for reals this time, that will occupy us in this episode.
Right. You know, for a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, if you watch the recent documentary, What We Left Behind, it talks about a lot of this kind of thing and does a really good job of describing what their thought process was with some of these kind of changes as they were going on.
Yeah, one of the things when the first came up that they needed to get their ratings up from season 3, one of the first ideas that was apparently considered was having the Vulcans leave the Federation as a shakeup of the thing, which is interesting how that ends up being part of the third season of Discovery, was the Vulcans have left the Federation. So I found that kind of interesting. But ultimately they decided that instead they wanted to have the Federation and the Klingons break off diplomatic relations, because the Klingons had, by this point, they'd become our friends. They'd been sort of defanged, and they'd become fodder for internal politics and family squabble stories. But now they're back as the really tough, adversaries, not villains per se, but they're adversaries. And I think that really revitalized the Klingons as an interesting race.
And that's something that they've been working towards for a while. When they first introduced us to the Klingons in Next Gen, in season 1 of Next Gen, they're actually part of the Federation. And that really did not stick.
Yes.
Pretty quickly, it's like, okay, no, they can be our allies, but they haven't actually become members. And then they progressively start to work towards them being more threatening by introducing the Sisters of Duras and Duras himself, and having Picard as the succession arbitrator and things like that.
Right. Yeah, it became very almost Romulan in its machinations and the internal stuff. But yeah, they had been building up the Klingons. Having Worf there as part of that, I think it was the key. And I think you're right. I think having Worf as the one who comes over, bringing with him all of the baggage, shall we say, that he had. I mean, could you imagine if they brought Wesley?
well, no one was contemplating that. I mean, you could say, okay, well, Data is one of the most popular characters.
Yeah.
He's one of the, I mean, you can't really bring Picard over.
Right.
So if you were looking at who else is popular, well, Riker's popular, and Data's popular, and Worf's popular. And of those three, Worf is the best.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Data would have. Worf is the one who's got a role that isn't necessarily duplicated. He's abrasive, so he's going to clash with, say, Kira and Odo, but he's
closest to Odo. I mean, he's the security officer on the Enterprise, and Odo's the security officer.
Right.
And they're both abrasive, but then everybody is on this show.
Yeah.
Right.
The question is, will he fit and play a useful role? And he does. And actually, I think building up the Klingons as major players in the Dominion War benefits this show.
Oh, yeah.
Having that alliance between the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Federation against the Dominion is a nice combination that I think adds to the show. I only wish we'd actually gotten more of the Romulans as part of that.
Yeah, they were in there, but they weren't quite as senior players. You talk about Worf and his position. It worked out well where he basically becomes the de facto captain of the Defiant. You know, so they have an actual battleship, and you have a Klingon at the head of the actual battleship.
Right.
You know, and that really worked out well because he fits, most of the time he fits better than Cisco does in that captain's chair, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the other aspects of this too is that I like the complexity to the overall story that we've got here. It's not simply the Alpha Quadrant versus the Dominion, but we've got this complexity where the Klingons, as we'll see in this episode, they see themselves as working on behalf of the interests of all the Alpha Quadrant, the Federation and the Romulans, whoever, by going after the Cardassians because they believe the Cardassians are in league with the Dominion, and not understanding why the Federation isn't coming along. Look, we're doing the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Right. So we should probably backfill the plot a little bit for the listeners. So what happens in this episode is, skipping over some of the character stuff for the moment, the main plot in this episode is a General Martok shows up with a Klingon battle fleet, and they request shore leave at DS9, which of course they're given, and so we have Klingons all over the station. But Cisco comes to suspect that there's more going on here than what Martok is telling him. And actually what Martok's orders are, apparently, is use your fleet with all its cloaks and stuff to board and search for changelings on ships in the Bajoran sector. And in particular, they're interested in what's happening on Cardassia because there has been a coup on Cardassia between seasons, and the military junta is out of power, and a civilian authority known as the Detapa Council, although they keep saying it consul, I don't know why. A consul and a council are two different things. A consul is an official. A council is a group of people. But the Detapa Council is now the civilian head of the Cardassian Empire. The Obsidian Order is gone, and the Klingons suspect that this kind of coup is really the founders seizing control of Cardassia. And even Odo admits, if my people wanted to take over Cardassia, that's how they do it. Right. So it's a plausible story. And so we have an early kind of issue with the Klingons. Of course, you know, we have Klingons beating people up on the station and abusing shore leave privileges. But then we have a Klingon captain named Kabok who seizes or attacks Cassidy Yates' ship, the Zoza, to search it for Klingons, and Cisco has to come to the rescue. And then we have the Klingons going after Cardassia itself.
Right.
And so that's sort of the main plot of this episode.
So it's interesting that we don't see Worf at all until the very end of Act 2. Because this is a feature length episode. It's basically 2 episodes together. It's one, so it's got 8 acts instead of the usual 4. And we don't see Worf until basically the very end of Act 2, and he really starts in Act 3. So this is interesting that how much buildup we get because of the length of this story. But it doesn't feel like they're stretching very much. Like they're stretching for time.
They pack a lot into these episodes, that's for sure, or this episode.
Yeah.
And the reason that Worf is brought in is to serve as an expert advisor on how to deal, and as an intermediary with the Klingons.
Right. You mentioned Cassidy, so we have the development of the relationship between Cassidy Yates and Cisco. Right. I like the beginning where she's back on the station after a trip or whatever, and they have a date, and her gift to him is a baseball cap from the Pike City Pioneers that her brother plays on the team. And this is one of those things where Cisco's love of baseball is part of the show.
I wanted to comment on this scene. So she goes over to his quarters where he's cooked dinner for them, and they each give each other a gift, and the gifts are both callbacks to original series episodes.
Yeah.
He has given her a shawl or something made of Tholian silk. And so that's obviously a reference to, the Tholian web, Tholian silk,
Web.
web.
Yep.
And it must be very heat resistant, given what they later establish about Tholians.
Yes. Wear that up.
Yeah. But, this was this was like one of the first, maybe the first mention of the Tholians since the original series, because they don't appear at all in Next Gen.
Right.
And so this was a pretty deep cut. Also, the Pike City Pioneers that Cassidy's brother plays for are on Cestus 3, the episode that from the episode Arena where the Gorns attacked.
Right.
And so they've apparently reestablished that colony, and they have a baseball team there now.
Named for, I wonder if Pike City must be named for Captain Pike.
I would suppose so, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I just always love seeing Cassidy Yates because I have such a crush on her. Her and Samantha Carter, they both have Cassidy Yates and Samantha Carter just both have these smiles that make me melt inside. So I always enjoy seeing them.
You and about a half a fandom, trust me.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're a sci-fi fan of a certain age, yes. Man, yeah.
Also, I as I was watching this episode, it reminded me just a couple of months ago. So I was doing a Columbo rewatch, and I was watching this Columbo episode from the 1990s, and it's got Penny Johnson in it, the actress who plays Cassidy Yates. And so I was just so tickled to see her in this other role, and she's just as bright and competent and cheerful as she is as Cassidy Yates in this Columbo episode. So I tweeted her. And she tweeted me back and said, actually, my family was just going to do a Columbo. This was Christmas Eve that I tweeted her. And she tweeted back and said, actually, we're just going to do a Columbo marathon for Christmas. And thank you. And it was just made my day to have a tweet from Penny Johnson.
You know, as bad as social media can be, sometimes you have these little, you see the nice parts of it, which is the ability to connect with someone like that. Yeah. And
of course, you can see her eventually on season 3 of Orville whenever that comes out.
Gosh, someday
maybe.
I keep forgetting that. Yeah. So we do have the introduction of General Martok. This is his first appearance, and at this point he has both eyes. And I gotta say, I think Martok is my favorite Klingon in all of Star Trek.
More than Worf.
Yes, I like Worf, okay, but he's kind of stiff.
Worf is an atypical. Yeah, Martok is not stiff in the same way.
Yeah.
I really like Martok. I don't know if I'd say he's my favorite, but I really like Martok a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't like him as much in this first appearance.
No.
Because he's not who he becomes. In fact, one of the things, now we mentioned that Klingon captain that had orders to search the Zoza, Kabak. It is indicated later on. I mean, Martok storms into Cisco's office after he's rescued Cassidy from Kabak and throws Kabak's ceremonial knife on Cisco's death and storms out again. And Cisco says, "Why did he give this to me?" And Jadzia, who's there, says, "He's letting you know that Kabak is dead and he probably executed him for disobeying orders."
Right.
And then again, at the end of this, when Cisco and the Klingon fleet are having a standoff, and Cisco is talking to Gowron and Martok about, look, it's going to be better if you stand down. Gowron's listening to reason, and Martok is the one that wants to keep attacking, even though, as Cisco has just pointed out, that's exactly what the Founders want, is for us to be at each other's throats. And Martok wants to keep attacking. Now, what the characters in the show don't know, and I don't even think the writers knew it at this point yet,
right,
is this isn't the real Martok. This Martok is a changeling, and the real Martok is in a prison.
Sure.
And so the first time, in fact, the two times that Martok appears this season, at the beginning and again at the end, it's actually the changeling Martok.
Right.
And that explains part of why he's different than the Martok we know and like, why he's willing to execute an officer when he shouldn't, and why he wants to keep fighting when he shouldn't.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that when that episode eventually comes up in season 5, I think it is, and it's like, what? Because someone else that's also been replaced.
Record scratch at that moment.
Yeah, but is Bashir, but I don't think the changeling Bashir is there yet.
Not
no,
yet.
that's much later.
Well, we actually had a changeling Bashir in the third season finale, but he dies.
Yes.
And so it's Julian's going to get grabbed another time later on, but much closer to when we find him.
That's right.
But
So
by the
there
way,
is-
speaking of eyes, we got to go back as we get a lot of the Gowron eyes.
I
Yes.
know.
Oh, some of the great Gowron eyes are in this episode.
Robert O'Reilly has the biggest eyes. They're just wow.
Yeah, there's one line that he gives it's in a meme, and it's awesome. Someone memed it with, "I want to talk to you about your car's extended warranty." It's got the eyes. It's awesome. So there's there's some scenes that have been cut from the syndicated version of this episode. They cut them for time, but have been added back in various online versions on Amazon and Netflix. One of them is this first scene in Quark's bar, where all the Klingons are there now, and Quark is talking to O'Brien and Bashir, and basically his point is they're too quiet.
Yeah.
If there are Klingons all over this station, it should be a lot rowdier and noisier than it is. I thought that was interesting.
I like how Quark knows the ordinary average ambient decibel level in his bar.
Yes.
He says ordinarily it's 65, but with Klingons it should be 85.
Yeah.
And decibels are a logarithmic scale, and if you go from 65 to 85, it's 10 times louder. Literally a full 10 times louder.
Isn't 85 like a chainsaw?
Well, it's between having a ringing phone directly up to your ear and having a hairdryer directly up to your ear. So I find it a little implausible that Klingons normally keep it at 85 ambient.
Yeah, well, it sounds a lot like some of the punk clubs that I saw in the 80s in downtown Boston. They would be that loud.
Oh, sure.
Of course, with ears like that, you'd imagine that Ferengi are very attuned to decibel levels. I mean, they can probably tell the slightest difference. So makes sense.
Speaking of changeling Martok, by the way, we have a scene where Martok meets with Cisco and Kira. I think it's Kira, and insists that they all cut their hands to prove that they're not changelings. So if this is a changeling Martok, it makes you wonder how do you get that. How do you do that?
They cover that later, I believe. I don't think they fully spell it out, but I can think of at least two ways that you could achieve that effect.
Yeah.
The first is get some human blood and carry it in you, or Klingon blood in his case, and just carry it in you and then leak it out your hand when the time comes.
Right.
So the other is trick knife, which is actually how they do it. They're not really cutting their hands in this scene. It's a knife it's a trick knife that bleeds.
It always amuses me in TV and movies where how casually characters will often just cut their hands not necessarily to prove they're not changing, but like as a sign of their allegiance, and they clasp hands or
do like a
stuff like that.
blood bond or whatever by just slicing their hand with a knife. It's like that.
How casually people that hurts like anything. Just kind of go on with things.
You ever get a paper cut? It's worse.
I think more of the recovery time than the momentary pain. I mean, it's going to hurt at the moment. I can deal with that, but man, that's going to take a long time to heal.
Yeah,
and I was thinking about that as I was watching them do it. I'm going, nah, it's going to be different. They can just go down to sickbay and use a dermal regenerator.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So,
also speaking of technological upgrades, they're retrofitting DS9 as a battle station now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it turns out to be pretty impressive, to say the least.
It is. Later on, it's hard for them to hold out against the Dominion and Cardassians, but this one, they do. Yeah, another one of those scenes, by the way, that was cut in syndication was this scene between Kira and Dax in the Hollow Suite, which, when you're trying to find things to cut, this doesn't seem to be all that important to the main story, the main plot line. But I think it's an interesting character moment because Kira, like Dax, is, as you expect, is all into this story that they're playing. And we find that Kira really has a hard time with imaginary play. And she talks about how, I just didn't have as much imagination as a kid. I was too busy trying to survive the occupation of my planet. And it's an interesting insight into Kira as a character and the trauma she continues to carry from that past. I kind of like this scene for that because, it is kind of a silly little thing to go into a hollow suite and pretend that these projections are real people.
Well, it seemed I agree. It's a nice insight on Kira as a character and on Dax as a character. I found it a little problematic, though, because they're just pretending to be in a day spa.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, and they've got a holographic masseur there that Jadzia is recommending to Kira. And it's like, okay. And Kira's objecting because he's not a real person. And I'm going, he's effectively a robot masseur.
Yeah.
Who
Right.
cares if he's real or not? Let him give you a massage or don't, but don't fret about it. I would understand more if this was like a holo novel
Mm-hmm.
that they were doing, and she feels silly interacting with a character that isn't real. That's, you know, although even then,
Like slugging Lancelot.
well, yeah, like later on, we have this other scene where they've apparently been playing King Arthur, and they're coming out of the holodeck, and Kira has just slugged Lancelot because he kissed her, and Jadzia's like, he's supposed to kiss you, and I'm playing a married woman, so she's apparently Guinevere.
Yeah.
But doesn't know the Arthurian legend, and so she thought Lancelot was acting inappropriately and decked him. And I could understand that, you know, her being uncomfortable, feeling silly playing Knights of the Round Table in the holodeck, but playing Day Spa and letting a robot made of light give you a massage, that's not as,
But
I would have
she's still
I would have
uptight.
maybe, she's still uptight.
Yeah.
You know,
But that's
we-
Kira.
Yeah, and we've complained with good reason about the character development on Discovery because it's way too much and way too melodramatic. I will say that this episode does a lot better job than anything Discovery has ever done in character development, both with Worf and with Kira and a couple of the other
Yeah.
characters they have in here.
Yes, I agree. That there's development, but it's somewhat subtle, at least in comparison. So another character that shows up that we get in this is Garrick, one of the favorites. Garrick is just a
Simple
great.
tailor. Just
a simple tailor. We start with him and Odo. Odo's demonstrating how he can pretend to eat and drink, which I think is fun. And then they get harassed by these Klingons. Odo stops them from harassing Morn. That's how it started.
Mhm.
And then Garrick then gets attacked in his shop by the Klingons because being a Cardassian. And then later on, when Bashir is treating him in the infirmary, Garrick says, Bashir's like, "Oh, they hurt you so bad." He's like,
they broke 7 of your transverse ribs.
Yeah.
But Garrick gets to say, but I got off several cutting remarks, which no doubt did serious damage to their egos.
Yeah.
I love Garrick's lines.
And you've almost got me completely healed, but the damage I did to them will last a lifetime.
Yes, I love how they write Garrick. It's just so great.
Well, then he just happens to be needed for some tailor work later on that just happens to hear some information that he might need to know.
Right. So Cisco wants to warn the Cardassians that the Klingons are coming without, violating the treaty between the Federation and the Klingons and starting a war between the Federation and Klingons. And so knowing that Garrick can get information back, accidentally, quote unquote, reveals the information while Garrick is measuring him for a new suit, sort of thing.
Yeah, so the reason they're doing that is they have learned that the Klingons are going to attack the Cardassian homeworld. The question is, do we warn the Cardassians? And because the Klingons are our allies, the Federation doesn't want to warn the Cardassians because that would blow up our treaty with the Klingons. If they thought we're deliberately sabotaging their war effort. And so, on the other hand, Cisco wants to protect the Cardassian government, or at least give them a shot, now that they have the civilian government. And so he says, well, we can't just go in and warn them, but we want to somehow get word to them. And so to construct plausible deniability, he summons Garrick and demands that he measure him for a suit in the middle of a meeting where they are discussing among themselves, the senior officers, the upcoming Klingon attack on the Cardassian homeworld. And so, and Garrick is really quick. There are like 2 lines they get out, neither of which is fully explicit, and he has all the information he needs to go back and report.
Right. So
and notice this is one of two times that Cisco circumvents Starfleet orders in this episode. So, yeah, because what's going to happen is, as the Klingons, even despite the warning that Garrick gives the Cardassians, the Klingons start whooping their butts for them, and the civilian government is going to fall. And so Cisco contacts Gul Dukat, who saw which way the wind was blowing and switched from the military junta to supporting the civilian government. And he arranges for Dukat to take the civilian government on a spaceship, which he'll meet and escort back to Federation space or Bajoran space to get him out of the way of the Klingons. Okay, rescue the Cardassian government is definitely beyond the mandate that Starfleet gave you. Your mandate was don't warn the Cardassian government. Now you're mounting a rescue mission for them without authorization.
Right. Yeah, that he seems to have.
We're well on our way to In the Pale Moonlight at this point.
Yes, that's why I was saying, like, in just this episode, because over the course of the next few seasons, Cisco is going to get more and more morally compromised in the sense, or ethically compromised from his Starfleet standard.
Well, there's even the issues of the treaties with the Romulans about cloaking device that Bashir reminds them, and we won't tell the Romulans, will we?
Yeah, right. So Cisco, at this point, seeing how the winds are blowing, so we're back at the before the hostilities have started. He requests Worf's help, as we mentioned, from Starfleet. Now, Worf at this point, at this point in Star Trek time, the Enterprise D has been destroyed in Generations, the movie Generations, and so Worf's been on leave, while the new Enterprise is prepared, the F, and he's been on leave at the Klingon monastery at Borath, which is interesting.
The E.
Yeah, you said the Enterprise F.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I skipped the E. So is there even an F? Never mind. So after the
there is a Star Trek Online, by the way.
That's right. That's right. That must be where I thought of it. He's been on leave at the Klingon monastery at Borath, which we saw in Star Trek Discovery Season 2, if you remember. And he's thinking of resigning from Starfleet. Does he even have a place there anymore? He's kind of has an identity crisis for himself, or midlife Klingon crisis.
This, I thought, was one of the least successful parts of this episode, where the Worf's whole career crisis, am I going to stay or am I going to go? It's like, this isn't really adding a lot to this for me.
Right.
Because we know what's going to happen by the end of the episode.
Yeah. Worf is not leaving Starfleet.
Yeah.
Well, and you could tell they wanted to do it as a parallel to Ben Sisko's own journey in the first episode of season 1. The pilot.
Right. It even brings it up. Yeah.
And so you could tell they were kind of doing that, and it almost kind of felt like a reintroduction, if you will. Kind of a reboot of sorts with that. But
yeah, that's true. So Worf goes to Quark's and he runs into O'Brien. He orders his prune juice. We have to have the prune juice. Runs into O'Brien and Bashir, and then meets Kira and Dax. Recognizes Dax as the former Curzon Dax, and she says something in Klingon. He's like, "Oh, this is quite an honor." And she says something in Klingon. I looked it up. You can look it up online. She says, "I'm better looking than he was," and Worf is kind of thrown.
Worf says, "I suppose so."
Yes. And then Kira, and then she doesn't tell the others what she actually said, which I think is funny. Oh, I just said something.
Says it loses something in translation.
Yes. So she's sort of boasting, flirting with him, but doesn't want the others to know.
And I don't know how much the writers realized this at this point, but knowing where Jadzia and Worf's relationship is going to go, this episode nicely sets that up.
Yeah.
Because she's no longer the insecure "who am I" Dax from season 1 living in Curzon shadow. She's her own woman now. And she's self-confident, and she is up on Klingons. I mean, she knows about them and is happy to engage with them. And she actually has a Klingon calisthenics program that Worf uses, and then she and Worf have a Batleth duel.
Yes.
Just for fun and as a workout. And you can totally see how this is going to take off into a romance, and they're going to end up getting married.
Right. A big one of the biggest elements in DS9 in this latter half of the series is that relationship and what happens as a result of it. Spoilers. So, also in this scene, Worf encounters Martok's son. Do we ever see Martok's son again, Drex? No. I think he's gone after
he gets his butt kicked by Worf. That's kind of the end of him.
Right. Yeah. Worf handles him pretty easily. Takes his dagger, and it's a ploy in order to get Martok to show up and demand his son's dagger and his honor back. And Worf wants this because Martok's been avoiding him, and this way he can demand an explanation for what's going on. Doesn't really get one, but he's trying, and he's frustrated. At every turn, until Jadzia is the one who tells him, "Look, stop going through official channels. Find a Klingon who owes you a favor, and ask him." She obviously, as having the memories of Curzon Dax, knows how to really work with the Klingons more than Worf does, because Worf was never raised among Klingons. So he goes drinking with an old friend of his dad, his Klingon father, which is in a kind of funny scene where they're singing some Klingon drinking songs. And he ends up revealing to him that what's really going on. But
that
now
they're going to invade Cardassia. That's the real plan. Yep. Something that I noted is there's a good bit of illogic in the. And now we're never told fully what the Klingon orders that Gowron has authorized are, but there's a good bit of illogic here, like that captain searching the Zoza. What are you going to search every spaceship in Bajoran space for changelings?
Right.
That's without authorization. I mean, that's kind of crazy. And of course, if you think of this, you can think of this as bad writing, or you can think of it as it is stupid because this is a changeling instituted plot, and they want the Klingons here causing chaos. And so there need to be some stupid aspects of what the Klingons are going to do. My question is, does it need to be this stupid, though?
Right. I mean, but yeah, when you think about it, the first thing the Dominion wants to do is to split apart the two most powerful allies in the Alpha Quadrant so that they can, divide and conquer.
And that happens here. The Klingons withdraw from the Khitomer Accords.
Right. They're successful. Not ultimately, but in this case. Odo, by the way, has figured out that Worf is torn between his Klingon heritage and his Starfleet duty somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but and has a moment where he kind of gives. There's an identification, like I'm a changeling, so my changeling heritage and my duty to the Bajoran people as the head of security here, and so they can identify on that level, which is interesting.
And a big part of this is, as you will notice from just how our analysis has been proceeding the last couple of minutes, a big part of this episode is Worf going around and meeting all of the regular cast and giving us moments that show how his character is going to interact and relate to them.
Yes.
And we also get the same thing with O'Brien, who of course knows him from the Enterprise, and it's like a reunion of friends for them. Right.
So the Klingons, they start their war with Cardassia. They invade. The peace treaty is the Khitomer Accords are ended after the Klingon the Federation Council condemns it, but Gowron shows up at the station on a ship, not the Nekvar, the flagship, but just a bird of prey, and he personally asked Worf to come join him in battle, and Worf is tempted.
I like how happy Gowron is in this scene. Because after Worf has given this information to the Federation about here's what the Klingons are actually planning, you would expect Gowron to get his big scowly eye thing on and be really mad at Worf. And he's not. He's like, oh, you did what you thought was right. I understand. You made enemies today, but I am not one of them. Ha ha ha. And he's genuinely friendly to Worf. And I really like that. And it fits with Klingon psychology. I mean, they're very mercurial. They could go either way.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you hit them, they think it's great.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's essentially kind of this. But now Worf has this do I stay or do I go thing in a new way than what he's already had. And when we jump over the commercial break that would separate part 1 from part 2, he immediately declines the offer. At which point, we get our good old friend, the Scowly Gowron, back.
Yes. He threatens to strip him of everything, of his titles. His brothers gets thrown from the council. You'll lose everything. And Worf says, "Accept my honor." And this is the funny thing about Worf is, he sees himself as he's the ideal Klingon that doesn't exist in reality. Because he sees he's grown up as someone who sees the Klingon ideal but didn't live it because he was raised on Earth. And so he's trying to live this ideal that no other Klingon really lives, as far as we know. And that's one of the things that makes Worf interesting as a character is how he lives up to a higher ideal than those who lived that life their whole lives.
Well, and Jadzia eventually, I can't remember what episode, but there's a coming up where she basically calls him on it and says, "You are the most," I can't remember exactly how it is, but basically you're the most morose Klingon I've ever met.
Right.
Yeah,
that's true. It kind of comes across that way.
I also like how in this scene, Gowron views himself as protecting the Alpha Quadrant, including the Federation.
Yes.
So his motives are good. He's just been deluded about what do we need to do here?
Right. And this is one of the things I like, is the Cardassians don't just simply heel turn and become bad guys. I'm sorry, the Klingons don't just turn and become the bad guys. They are doing what they see as the right thing, but not. They're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Well, at least that's what the episode wants us to think.
Right. So we have this whole thing about the invasion. Worf has decided to resign and go off to something called the Nyberite Alliance, and et cetera, which we know is not going to really happen.
In fact, this is the only time the Nyberite Alliance is ever mentioned.
Right. Well, because they're so far away.
Yeah.
We have this...
But Cisco declines his resignation, says, "I need you right now, regardless of what happens in the future."
Yeah, it's way too volatile at the moment to let you go. And so they go to this rendezvous you mentioned before with the Dukat and the Tapa Council, and Cisco has to do battle with the Klingons in order to not just save them, but survive. And so now we have fighting, like open warfare between Klingons and Starfleet. So
only unauthorized by the Federation Council.
I was going to say, I'm surprised that Cisco stays and not thrown into jail. I mean, they threw Michael Burnham into jail for less, right?
Yeah, I assume because Cisco won and had the gratitude of the Cardassian government.
Right.
The Tapa Council probably saved him from disciplinary action.
Right.
Also, we have here, as they're starting this sequence, and so a lot of the second episode is basically a big outer space action sequence. And you know how much I love action sequences, because nothing important happens with the plot until the action sequence is over.
Yes.
But just before the action sequence starts beginning, we get a glimpse of Patricia Tallman.
Yes.
Lita Alexander from Babylon 5, who is frequently in Next Gen as a stunt woman and a background character. But here she actually has a named part. She's the weapons officer on the Defiant. I mean, she doesn't have a name, but she has a job description. Yeah. And she gets a line for once. She gets to say, "Cloaking device is functioning within normal parameters."
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't realize, but I was kind of looking up her bio. She actually was the stunt double for Gates McFadden in Generations. So there's a scene where she goes flying, and that's actually Patricia Tallman doing it, because she does a lot of stunts. She actually, of course, those of us who watch Babylon 5, that's probably what we know her best for, is Lita Alexander. But she's done stunts. Right. She's done a lot of horror movies. She's been in a lot of those. The George Romero horror movies, she's in quite a bit of those. So she's pretty prolific actress.
There is a nice character moment after they've rescued the Tapa Council and Dukat, where Dukat comes to the bridge and says, "Captain, would you kindly inform the security guard that he does not have to monitor my every move? It makes me feel unwelcome." And Dax says, "Oh, I won the bet, Benjamin. You owe me dinner." And Dukat's like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, she bet me that you would thank me for the rescue before you started complaining, but she said you wouldn't, and so I lost." So very Dukat. I love that.
I was going to say, there's a great scene with Dukat and Garrick, where they're arguing with each other as they're trying to protect the government,
the council. Yeah, Jimmy.
So on our way to rescue the Tapa Council, there's an interesting character moment for Cisco because they encounter some wreckage, and they're not in the place to find the Detapa Council yet, so they're not thinking it's them. But they find this wreckage in space, and there may be survivors in the wreckage, and Cisco leaves them to make the rendezvous to rescue the Detapa Council. And so I find that interesting, because the normal Star Trek thing is stop, do scans, and rescue the survivors. But it's like, no, I'm willing to live with the deaths of these people if it means rescuing the Detapa Council.
Right. Yeah, they're told it might be a trick to get them to decloak, and because there's probably cloaked Klingon vessels waiting for whoever comes to rescue them. And so he doesn't want to take the risk of alerting the Klingons that Defiant is on its way, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so it's an interesting moral decision he makes there.
Also, during the battle, we have a couple of lines that I need to complain about. So, and this crops up several times on Star Trek, actually. But at one point, Dax says, so they've got a Klingon bird of prey on their tail. And I mean, really on their tail. It is just meters away from them. And they've taken down their shields in order to be able to beam the Detapa Council over, and they're using their tractor beam to kind of thwart what the Klingons are doing, and the Klingon attack. And Dax says the ablative armor is holding, and it's like, okay, I know you're an actress, not a linguist, but the word is pronounced ablative. And every time I hear ablative, it's like, okay, no, ablative. This is, among other things, this is one of the major cases in Latin.
Yeah.
But I can let that pass. We have another line later in the same sequence where they've gotten the Detapa Council away at this point, if I recall correctly, and Worf announces the Klingons have moved to point-blank range. Now, okay, first, the Klingons were mere meters off your stern before.
Yeah.
Whatever point-blank range means in space, they were already there. Secondly, you don't know what point-blank range means, because what point-blank range means is it's within, if you're firing a gun at a target within a gravitational field, point-blank range means the target is close enough that you don't have to account for the gravitational drop of the bullet, and you'll still be able to hit the target. So there's no gravity in space. Your phaser beam is not going to drop due to gravity. You're always at point-blank range by that definition.
To be fair, I think a lot of people use point-blank range more of the sense of, broadside, hitting the broadside of a barn. Close enough that it's impossible to miss. Yeah. Not so much of, yes, this is a distance that the projectile will not get unduly affected by gravity.
And to be fair to Terry Farrell, I think in the military, I think they say ablative when they mean ablative, that kind of armor.
Well, and you hear that
only because they don't speak Latin.
They don't know. That's right.
She's not the only one in Star Trek to use ablative armor. You hear that all over the place.
I mentioned that. Yes.
Yeah. Hey, we're not geeks if we don't complain about the little things as well as the big things, and that's I'm perfectly happy to accommodate that. That's
having
fine.
Buried Caesar, now let me praise him, because after they have their initial battle to where they rescue the Detapa Council, they have to get back to the station without a cloak, and while they're doing that, we have the best scene in this episode.
I was just about to bring it up. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
The root beer.
The root beer scene where you have Garrick in Quark's bar talking to Quark, and they're relating to each other.
Yep.
They both recognize that they don't like the Federation, but from both of their perspectives, the Federation is their only hope of salvation now.
Mm-hmm.
And they find and they realize this is true. It's true for Quark because he needs the Federation to protect the station and his bar. And it's true for Garrick because he needs the Federation to protect his home world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're both in this same position, and they're really bonding over this. And it's very insightfully done. And so Quark says, now, Garrick is there drinking his typical Kanar, the Cardassian beverage. And Quark says, let me have you try this. And he pours him some root beer and asks him to taste it. And Garrick does, and he says, oh, it's vile, which is actually probably the response that most people have the first time they ever try root beer.
Yeah.
And Quark says, yes, it's so bubbly and cloying and happy. And Garrick says, it's insidious.
Well, he first
you
says
missed the
it's
first
just
part.
like the Federation.
Just like the Federation.
Well,
yeah.
I believe that line is next. He says
it
it's
twice.
insidious, and Quark says, just like the Federation.
Right.
And then Garrick says, do you think they'll be able to save us? And there's just poetry to that scene. I love that.
Yeah,
right. Well,
Quark also says,
yeah.
You know what's really frightening? If you drink enough of it, you begin to like it.
Yes.
Yes.
Insidious.
Yes.
Just like the Federation.
It's kind of funny, yeah, when you think, like, from an outsider perspective. I like getting that outsider perspective. We're the Federation. It's humans, right? But from the outside perspective, we're happy and bubbly and cloying and insidious.
Yeah.
So I like that one. And another one that they cut in syndication. It's just kind of crazy because
that one's crazy because that's the best scene of the whole whole episode.
I mean, if you go on YouTube and you search this episode, this is the scene that's going to come up. This has become probably the most famous scene of this episode.
At one point, they added this scene as filler for time, and then we're going to cut it when they started to run out of time again, and they had to fight to get it back in, which is kind of fascinating. So
Cisco gets back to the station with a huge, massive Klingon fleet behind him now.
Right.
At which point he gets to deliver the line, now witness the firepower of this fully armed and operational battle station.
Yes. Of course, this turns out better for him than it did for that guy.
Yeah.
So one of the things I found interesting was Bashir's his pep talk before the battle for his medical staff, which was interesting. Remember, Klingons prefer to use knives and batlets in close combat, so if we get boarded, you can expect, all of the stabbing wounds and that sort of thing.
No. He says lacerations, crushed bones, blunt force trauma injuries, and I'm going, what about puncture wounds?
Yes, that's right. Keep calm, remember your training, do the best you can, report to your post. You're very, sort of, it's good that Bashir, that the actor has the British accent, because it's very British. Keep calm, stay, keep to your duty.
That was my thought. Keep calm and carry on.
Yes,
just needs to work into a reference to St. Crispin's Day.
Yes, that's right. So
they will hold their manhood, personhood, beinghood cheap that they were not with us.
And then, Father Cory, you referenced this, that Dukat shows up where Dukat and some Starfleet security guards are standing to protect the Detapa Council.
Yep. And of course, Dukat and Garrick don't like each other at all. I mean, obviously they're bitter enemies. And Garrick, they're both pointing phasers at each other, and then Garrick just stands right next to Dukat and says, "You're good, like it or not, we're fighting together."
Right, side by side. So we have the space battle, the shield generators fail, Klingons board the station, this huge bloodbath.
And this is the first CGI space battle on Deep Space Nine.
Mm.
Babylon 5 at the time was the only sci-fi show that was using CGI for outer space visuals.
Right.
And Star Trek up to this point had been all practical effects and model work. And so but Babylon 5 had now proved that the technology was good enough. You could use CGI for outer space battles. Right. And so this is the first one we see on Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
Right. There is some model work in this, and I saw that in one of the scenes, because with all of the ships, the big fleet, and apparently they were using some literal like toys and like model kits, commercial off-the-shelf model kits for some of this. Because
I'm sure.
I think it's awesome. we do get, right before the battle, we get Gowron doing the, today is in Klingon, today is a good day to die, and that whole thing. So that I do like the bits of untranslated Klingon we get. Like we don't talk down to the audience. You'll figure it out from context. You're going to hear the Klingon. You're going to
either you hear it from context, or somebody will translate. Like Worf says, "No, he said today is a good day to die." It's like, oh, okay, right. We're in trouble.
So
like, why is everyone's universal translator in their ear offline?
right. So Cisco ends up making the case to Gowron that it's in order to get the battle to the end, is that their fighting makes the Dominion stronger. Just destroying an empire, I think it was Gowron says, destroying an empire to win a war is no victory, and ending a battle to save an empire is no defeat. Mm-hmm. And so that's the realization. Like, why are we doing this? We're only serving the purposes of the Dominion by fighting each other, and this is where the Martok changeling is trying to keep the battle going, and Gowron uncharacteristically keeps a cool head and says, "No, well, that's enough." So, a interesting point there. There is a lot of internal fighting, like, and stunt work in this one. I don't know if you noticed, like, guys flying off of catwalks and all kinds of stuff like this. I mean, this is a bloodbath.
Well, the body count on the promenade is incredible. The floor is just covered with dead or injured
bodies.
Klingons.
Yeah,
and Cisco and Kira are performing almost implausibly well against the Klingons in ops.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The only one of our regulars who gets injured in this is Kira, who gets a puncture wound. But everybody else is just fine, except for all the Klingons.
Stabbed in the back. Well, I get Kira. I mean, fighting those Cardassians all those years.
Well,
I mean, I get
she could be, yeah. And every Klingon is not as tough as Worf, so yeah.
Right. And if you want implausible, the whole scene with Dax and Worf fighting is what I felt was more implausible, because you've got this very skinny, petite woman versus Worf.
Right.
And she holds her own against him. It's like, that's a little implausible.
I don't care how much you remember about Curzon. That's not going to help you. Hold on.
Yeah. I took that, since this is a calisthenics program, I took that as he's not trying to kill her.
Right.
This is a stylized form of ritual exercise combat.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he's not using his full strength. If he wanted to kill her, he would just kill her.
Yeah. Well, she calls him out on that and says, "Oh, are you holding back on me because I'm a woman?" But still, I mean, he does end up winning the battle, the mock battle, but still.
Yeah. So after the battle, after things have been cleaned up and all the bodies have been disposed of, they, things open up. Morn is the first one.
We know how they dispose of organic matter in Star Trek.
Yes, tomorrow's lunch. So Morn is the first customer back in Quarks, which I like. It's a nice little nod to Morn. Cisco ends up having to convince Worf to stay and not go off to the Nybrite Alliance by telling him that running from pain and loss won't save you from the pain.
He basically accuses Worf of being a coward.
Yes. Essentially. And it also wouldn't let him deny that he's always been a Starfleet officer and always will be, no matter what, which is, kind of interesting. So Worf does end up staying. He shows up in ops wearing his new red uniform with the new title of Strategic Operations Officer, which is, I think, an interesting role for Worf, is sort of advisor on the Starfleet's interests within this area outside of the Bajoran system, is the way I'd look at it.
Yep.
And we find out that the Klingons have pulled back from most of Cardassia, the Cardassian Empire, although they're refusing to give up several Cardassian colonies and are fortifying their positions. And so we're left with the ominous, looks like the Klingons are here to stay.
Which is a symbolic line referring to the whole show as a whole.
Right. Because Cisco then says, yes, but maybe they are, but so are we. And that's how we end the episode. So any final thoughts on this episode, Father Cory?
Another scene I really liked was Quark was going to stay and fight for his shop, his bar. And of course, he has this case with his disruptor that was from when he was in freight service. Opens it up. There's a note from Rom saying, "Oh, sorry, I borrowed all the parts for the
to fix something.
We'll return them soon."
Yes, Jimmy.
So even though I'm not a fan of action sequences, during the fist fight on Deep Space Nine, there's a moment where we cut to different characters to see what's happening to them during the fight. And at one point we cut to Odo, and most people are using guns, at least at this stage, or batless. And Odo is just punching people with his fists.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, you're a changeling. You can do amazing things in combat. Why are you just punching people with your fist? And he's not even doing it intelligently, like a uppercut to the nose or something. He's got the two-hand back bring your hands
smash
down on someone back. Yeah.
The Kirk smash.
It's not even intelligent fist fighting. And they kind of hang a lantern on this, because then another character, I think it's Julian, runs up and saves him with a gun, and he says thanks. And it's like, yeah, if that's the way you're fighting, you're going to need people to bail you out.
I mean, if I was going to do hand-to-hand combat as a changeling, I just turn my my fists into like hammerheads, metal hammerheads, and just start smashing.
Yep.
That's one thing you could do, or you could just envelop a person and suffocate them into unconsciousness.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he's a changeling. There's a whole lot more he could be doing than
turn
just,
your hands into giant scissors and decapitate them in one stroke.
That seems a bit gruesome for DS9, but
okay, pinch their carotid artery until they fall unconscious.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Just squeeze them into a submission. All right. I think that should do it for us for now. Let's take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. Now's a great time to become a StarQuest patron, thanks to a generous gift from a StarQuest supporter. When you start a new Patreon monthly pledge at sqpn.com/give, the first 3 months will be matched by an equal amount from our donor. So if you became a new patron at, say, $10 a month, after 3 months, our donor would give $30 to StarQuest to support all our shows, including this one, which makes your gift go even further. So if you've been thinking of becoming a StarQuest patron, now's the time. Visit sqpn.com/give today. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us each week. So what do you think of The Way of the Warrior, this season premiere for season 4 of Deep Space Nine? Let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, or our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Voyager episode, The Scorpion Part 1. Until then, Father Cory Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Thank you, and kapla!
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, today is a good day to die. Kapla!